Pronto, tal como estava anunciado no programa, vamos ter agora a intervenção do professor Manuel Caldeira Cabral, Ministro da Economia, que nos dá a honra de termos aqui, não na abertura, mas na continuação dos nossos trabalhos. Muito obrigado, Sr. Ministro.
Muito bom dia a todos. Queria começar por cumprimentar o Presidente da Associação Portuguesa de Energias Renováveis, António Sá da Costa, mas queria cumprimentar todos os empresários, investidores que estão aqui neste setor e saudar este encontro pela própria dimensão que já hoje assume. As energias renováveis têm, de facto, um peso grande na economia portuguesa, na produção de energia e na economia em geral, e são um setor ao qual nós damos a maior importância. Estive aqui a ver o exemplo dos prémios de projetos de investigação, quer ao nível de teses de mestrado, quer de teses de doutoramento, em energias renováveis, e penso que é uma iniciativa muito louvável o distinguir a investigação e o promover a investigação nesta área. É algo que, ao nível do Governo, também temos feito, nomeadamente no programa Interface, a ideia de promover a eficiência energética, de promover que os centros de aplicação, de transferência de tecnologia e desenvolvimento de inovação aplicada trabalhem com a indústria no sentido de encontrar novas soluções para a eficiência energética, para a aplicação de novas fontes de energia, para encontrar soluções que possam, de facto, contribuir para a competitividade da indústria. Foi também nesse sentido que lancei, agora mesmo, que estamos a lançar hoje, uma nova linha de eficiência energética, e uma linha de eficiência energética que permite não só investimentos em eficiência energética na indústria e no setor do turismo, mas que permite também a estas empresas industriais e de turismo participarem também na produção e na produção para autoconsumo com base em energias renováveis. É uma linha de 100 milhões, é uma linha que apoia projetos em pequenas e médias empresas, mas projetos que podem ir até 2 milhões. É uma linha com condições muito favoráveis, exatamente por utilizar o sistema de garantias de Estado, mas é uma linha que visa apoiar a eficiência energética, que em paralelo com as energias, o crescimento das energias renováveis, é um caminho para a melhoria ambiental, para termos não só mais competitividade a nível de custos energéticos, mas temos mais competitividade contribuindo também melhor para o ambiente. Vindo aqui, queria salientar 3 ideias do trabalho que temos feito ao nível das energias renováveis. Em primeiro lugar, um trabalho muito grande ao nível do solar, dos concursos que lançámos com o solar, do tratar e mesmo os investimentos ao nível da rede, de fazer previsões diferentes das que vinham do passado, das necessidades de reforço de rede, que têm a ver exatamente com o incremento da energia solar. Esta área de energia teve uma evolução notável, teve uma evolução em termos de custos de produção, de custos de investimento por megawatt notável e, de facto, hoje é competitiva em Portugal. Temos já aprovados 1.100 megawatts de energia solar, temos já em construção e já finalizados também, que eu próprio pude inaugurar, muitos destes 1.100 megawatts. É bom ver que na eólica chegámos a valores já muito superiores a estes, mas chegámos ao longo de 20 anos e que estamos a passar de cerca de 400 megawatts de energia solar instalados em todo o Portugal para 1.400 só com os que já estão aprovados, mas há muitos outros projetos em aprovação e também o trabalho que estamos a fazer de reforço da rede vai permitir mais projetos destes avançarem. É muito interessante o que está a acontecer com a energia solar, que é permitir que esta energia surja, que estes projetos surjam com concursos transparentes e claros, mas sem subsidiação. E há 2, 3 anos discutia-se muito a necessidade de subsidiação para que houvesse projetos na energia solar. A realidade desmentiu totalmente essa necessidade. De facto, os projetos de energia solar são rentáveis a preços de mercados e têm toda a capacidade para ser rentáveis. E isto é uma mudança de paradigma muito interessante. Nós tivemos durante dezenas de anos, centenas de anos, uma certeza sobre Portugal. Portugal não tem petróleo, não tem carvão, ou se tem algum destes recursos minerais fósseis, não é em quantidade suficiente para o seu consumo e, portanto, era e foi durante todo este tempo visto como um país escasso em energia. Um país que seria, cronicamente, sempre um importador de energia, como outros países são importadores de outras matérias-primas ou de outros produtos que não conseguem produzir. Era algo a que tínhamos que nos resignar. Eu penso que as pessoas que trabalham para esta associação não compreenderam isso e não se resignaram. E, de facto, Portugal conseguiu ir construindo uma capacidade de produção de energias renováveis que demonstram hoje que Portugal não é obrigatoriamente um país escasso em recursos energéticos. É um país escasso ou abundante em recursos energéticos, dependendo da tecnologia, e a tecnologia está a ter uma evolução que nos é muito favorável, e com esta evolução tecnológica, de repente, Portugal é competitivo a produzir energia solar sem qualquer subsidiação, e o mesmo está a acontecer também com a evolução eólica, e o mesmo está a acontecer também com a energia hídrica, em que Portugal tem um forte potencial. Portugal tem uma combinação de fontes de energias renováveis muito interessante, que é de facto muito rara a nível mundial, que é ter montanhas e rios onde se conseguem fazer barragens que permitem acumular energia da água, é ter uma costa atlântica com vento permanente, do qual nós muitas vezes na praia nos queixamos, mas que é um recurso interessante em termos energéticos, e a ter condições solares muito interessantes. Porque, sejamos claros, o que hoje é rentável na produção do solar no Alentejo, ou mesmo no centro e no norte de Portugal, não é rentável se falarmos do norte da Europa. O número de horas de exposição solar, a capacidade de produção a partir da energia solar, fazem com que o investimento seja rentável em Portugal. Em países em que a exposição e o número de horas solares é 2 ou 3 vezes menor do que em Portugal, ainda não se atingiu o ponto de rentabilidade. E por isso mesmo é que nós poderemos ser e poderemos passar a ter uma vantagem comparativa exatamente no mesmo sítio onde tínhamos uma desvantagem comparativa. E esta vantagem comparativa é mais interessante no sentido que poderemos ser competitivos não a produzir energia ou uma energia qualquer, mas a produzir uma energia do futuro, uma energia com baixo teor de carbono e, portanto, ou sem qualquer emissão de carbono, no caso das energias renováveis, e, portanto, nesse sentido, uma energia que será mais valorizada face à outra. O que é que o Governo está a fazer aqui? No caso do solar, este processo de concursal e de licenciamento está a ter uma enorme adesão, criou transparência e clareza e, nesse sentido, foi muito favorável à atração de investimento estrangeiro, mas está a ser também, e penso que é positivo, muito investimento português, mas estamos a ir mais longe. Algo que vamos lançar no próximo ano é os certificados de origem. E os certificados de origem que garantem que a produção foi feita a partir de fontes renováveis são muito importantes para o futuro. Para muitas empresas de renováveis que têm preços garantidos e que têm uma série de contratos que, de facto, as protegem por mais uns anos ou menos uns anos, estes certificados poderão não ser, no curto prazo, muito importantes ou muito interessantes, mas serão no prazo de 2, 3, 4, 5 anos, quando terminarem essas garantias de preço, serão a forma de este mercado valorizar mais o que deve ter mais valor. E estes certificados de origem são algo que vamos lançar no próximo ano e o que queremos é que haja de facto um mercado que diferencie a produção energética com base nas diferentes fontes e que, nesse sentido, valorize as fontes renováveis. Valorize de duas maneiras. Valorize com contratos com preço fixo e a compra certa que os grandes consumidores de energia vão querer fazer, dando estabilidade a eles próprios em termos de custos e mais competitividade, mas dando também estabilidade a quem faz investimentos nas energias renováveis sobre o que vai receber pela energia que produz. Mas são importantes também porque sabemos que cada vez mais há grupos de consumidores que querem saber a origem da sua energia e que estão dispostos a pagar 5% mais, 10% mais, se souberem que este fornecedor fornece só, por exemplo, com base num mix de energias renováveis. Mas é importante também a um outro nível, no mercado que nós perspectivamos, venha a crescer a nível europeu. Cada vez mais empresas, por razões éticas e de mercado, querem posicionar-se como empresas que só consomem energias renováveis. Os Estados, os direitos estatísticos das obrigações que decorrem dos compromissos europeus, querem também saber que podem comprar energia renovável, nomeadamente aqueles países que, pelo sol que não têm, pelo vento que não têm, pela possibilidade, por serem mais planos, de não terem as mesmas possibilidades para produzir barragens, para produzir energia com base hidroelétrica, poderão querer comprar esses certificados. É um passo importante de diferenciação da energia produzida por este setor, das energias renováveis, e de, na diferenciação, criar valorização e poder criar também um mercado mais estável na troca de energia. Nesse sentido, o trabalho que fizemos em termos das interligações é também muito importante. O que concluímos, e concluímos no trabalho que também fazemos com o setor, é que o crescimento das energias renováveis, que são energias intermitentes, que são energias que em muitos casos não coincidem com as horas de consumo ou que podem, em alguns casos, não coincidir com as horas de consumo, ia requerer cada vez mais também mercados maiores e mais interligados. A revolução que aconteceu nas últimas décadas no transporte de energia faz com que transportar energia a longas distâncias tenha hoje perdas muitíssimo inferiores ao que tinha há alguns anos, mas o mercado ibérico continuava isolado. Trabalhámos em duas frentes, a primeira na relação com Marrocos e na ideia de criar uma interligação a Marrocos, fazendo com que Portugal seja um ponto de contacto nas transferências energéticas entre continentes. A segunda, trabalhando ao nível europeu, e a cimeira que tivemos aqui em Portugal com o Presidente Macron, com o Primeiro-Ministro da Espanha e com o Primeiro-Ministro de Portugal, foi muito importante nesse sentido, porque deixou claro que a ligação através dos Pirineus é para ser feita, que deixou muito claro e teve uma assinatura de uma fonte de financiamento para fazer essa ligação e, de facto, o mercado ibérico, se isolado, se apostar fortemente nas energias renováveis, vai ter momentos em que tem mais produção do que consumo e a energia que se desperdiça é a energia que não vai para lado nenhum se as interligações nos Pirineus se mantivessem no nível a que estava de 2, 2,5%, que não dá para ser suficiente para exportar energias quando há excessos de produção. O facto de aumentarem a curto prazo, ou médio prazo, se quisermos pôr nesse sentido, para os 8%, mas que a um prazo mais alargado queremos que cheguem aos 15%, já absorve grande parte dessa variabilidade que vai sempre existir na produção e permite-nos ter confiança de que a expansão em que estamos a apostar e em que os investidores estão a apostar nas energias renováveis em Portugal é uma expansão que está enquadrada num alargamento do mercado e na possibilidade de exportação, que está alavancada também em contratos claros e concessões claras, feitas de uma forma transparente, como os concursos que temos lançado para a energia solar, e está também e será alavancada por uma valorização dos próprios consumidores que os certificados de origem garantem. Muitas destas coisas e o trabalho que temos feito com a APREN no PNEC, no Plano Nacional de Energia e Clima, vão exatamente neste sentido, no reforço do papel das energias renováveis, mas o reforço do papel das energias renováveis numa nova fase. E esta nova fase, para o Ministro da Economia, para o Ministério da Economia, mas para as empresas de todos os setores, tem muita importância. Se as energias renováveis e a aposta que fizemos nas renováveis teve um custo, e foi um custo importante e que deve ser assumido pela sociedade portuguesa, de sermos líderes neste setor, teve custos para o setor elétrico, custos que hoje muitos criticam, mas que é preciso entender também à luz da evolução que foi do preço dos combustíveis fósseis. Se os preços tivessem mantido tão altos como estavam há uns anos atrás, o que teríamos era exatamente uma redução de custo por termos mais energias renováveis, mas penso que a perspectiva para o futuro é nesse aspecto muito interessante, porque a evolução tecnológica, a redução dos custos de produção, vão permitir que dentro de 10 anos possamos estar a falar de Portugal ser mais competitivo e ter custos menores na energia, exatamente porque apostou nas energias renováveis e se libertou, se calhar daqui a 10 anos ainda não totalmente, mas se libertou parcialmente da dependência das flutuações dos combustíveis fósseis, que, como sabemos, são às vezes muito penalizadoras para a economia portuguesa. Por isso, desejo aqui uns ótimos trabalhos, uma ótima discussão e desejo um ótimo futuro para este setor, com o qual continuamos a trabalhar e queremos continuar a trabalhar, porque será um setor de futuro para a economia portuguesa e para a sua competitividade. Muito obrigado e muitos parabéns.
Obrigado, Sr. Ministro. Bem, enquanto o Sr. Ministro da Economia se retira, eu vou chamando ao palco o segundo painel, Berto Martins, diretor adjunto na Direção dos Mercados Energéticos da EDP, Josh Roberts, Advocacy Officer na Rescoop, e ainda Javier Revuelta, Principal Management Consulting, Outlook. E tal como no painel anterior, cada um dos intervenientes vai ter 12 minutos para fazer a sua intervenção e depois vamos partir aqui para o debate. Berto, o primeiro. Agora já corrigimos aqui o timer, portanto, ali aponta claramente o tempo que tem cada um.
Muito obrigado. Em primeiro lugar, obrigado pelo convite para estar aqui presente. Falar aqui um bocadinho sobre o tema dos mercados e dos mercados de serviços de sistema em particular e da componente das energias renováveis e o que é que podem fazer neste momento e perspectivar também um bocadinho aquilo que vai ser, na minha visão, o futuro não só das energias renováveis como também destes mercados de serviços de sistema. Portanto, começamos aqui apenas com um pequeno vídeo para quem não está tão familiarizado com a EDP, uns pequenos números. I will go to English because some of our guests will have problems understanding the thing, so it's better to stick with English and the panel also. Can we put the video on, please?
Energy is all of us. Energy we share with all those all over the world who make us go further. Energy that we bring to more than 11 million customers in the most diverse places. Energy with which we overcome the speed of the wind. We have given our best in Portugal for 40 years. Crossing borders, achieving our goals, and we want to continue to do so until we take in the other side of the world. A world in which we continue to grow. Energy is our way of being on a planet that gives us everything, and to which we want to give everything back. That is why for every wind that blows, for every ray of sunshine, for every wave in the sea, we respond with more research, more innovation, and commitment to do more and better, with the focus on our customers. For all those who give us the energy to grow, with respect for diversity, creativity, and imagination. With the firmness of an internationally recognized and award-winning track record in Portugal. With the certainty of wanting to continue to bring to everyone an energy that multiplies, that transforms, that is felt and is lived. EDP is much more than energy. It's life.
Okay. So, after seeing the video and the strong commitment that we at EDP have with renewable generation, we can see that in the last couple of years, almost all the reinforcements that we have in our generation portfolio was based on renewables.
Berto, temos só um segundo. Posso pedir à parte técnica para iniciarem o timer? Pronto, já está. Obrigado.
So as I was saying, based on renewables, mainly hydro and wind. So we have facing a strong investment period on recent hydro generation, with obviously also renewable, and that gives us the capacity to take the storage of those big reservoirs, also to balance the system and to be able to respond to the system needs, not only at the grid level, but also at balancing situations. In Iberia, we see in this chart what Heike showed on the previous panel, that we faced a huge increase of renewable generation, so it's the green area on the chart, until 2012. But then, with the lack of investment after that, that area it has become much more stable. So the hydro generation in Portugal and Spain is also very dependent on the inflows, of course. And so the yellow part is much dependent of the dry or wet year that we may have. Nuclear is almost the base. And what is closing the diagram for now is, in fact, coal and gas, the technologies that we want to, well, in the couple of years it will not be possible to do, but 2040, 2050, to make disappear completely, to have a decarbonized energy sector in Portugal and Spain, and desirable in Europe. So you probably know all of this, but just to remember things. So in Portugal, the renewable generation almost 100% has feed-in tariffs, and has also a dispatch priority. In the opposite, at other countries, we do not have too much curtail, especially in Portugal. We have, as I said, the hydro generation to balance things, and that is most of the times capable to do so without curtailing the wind generation. And the wind generation and the renewable sources are bought mandatorily by the EDP last resource retailer, and then it is placed on the market with not having the risk of the price due to the feed-in tariffs, and not having also the incentive to balance their schedule, because on the current legislation they do not pay penalties by the imbalances that they are causing. This chart here shows what happened in 11th of March this year. So the darker curve represents the demand, the hourly demand in Portugal. The lowest black curve sums up the pumping that we made on an hourly base, so it is above the demand, of course. The blue areas, the hydro generation, so run-of-river generation and reservoir generation, and the green, the renewable. So as you can see here, there was a lot of excess of generation in Portugal in this day. This caused, of course, a huge amount of exports to Spain and over the French border also to Central Europe. But it was perfectly possible to manage 100% renewable with no curtailments and no major problems within the grid with this kind of load diagram. And here we have also some news considering some marks, let's say. So in 2016, we have 4 consecutive days with 100% renewable generation. It was the first time it was highly published in the international media. This year, we already have 3 consecutive days, again, with 100%. And on the upper part of the chart, we can see the statistics that our TSO, RAN, publishes. And that last year, that was a very dry year in Portugal, we still managed to have 41% of renewable generation in the grid to supply the demand. And this year, we had a couple of more drops of water because it's not a wet year. We have some rain in March and April, but we are with 54% until now. Well, this is a statistic from beginning of September. So 54% of renewable generation supplying our demand. So going to what Christoph said in the previous panel, we are strongly supporting the EU targets because 32% of all energy, it was mentioned something like 50-something%. We are already there, but we still have a path to go, and we have to invest much more on this. But with our market, this is a problem. And the problem is that the trends on the market price is this that I'm showing here. Of course, the last couple of months with the increasing of the oil and CO2 tends to show a little bit different scenario. But on the long run, the prices went very, very much down. So, and of course, we have to pay the technologies. So we were seeing some numbers on the solar and on the wind that were paid on the auctions for those kinds of technologies. And we see, in fact, that some of those numbers are slightly above the market prices as we know for today. And if all of those renewable technologies goes within our market design, prices will go much down, and no one is going to be paid. And this is for solar and wind. If we go to the hydro technologies that EDP invested in the last couple of years, we have to pay a lot more on the capex of those facilities. So this market does not pay, in fact, the investments that it's necessary to do. So something has to be done. Something that can be ancillary services. So ancillary services, here we can go right for the last bullet that depends on the market. That's one of the things that I would like in the near future is that most of the markets could be much more harmonized, and some of the markets could have more support on those ancillary services compared to what we have in Portugal and in Spain. So ancillary services are obviously needed and are extremely important to ensure the safety of supply and the security of the system. We can divide it in 2 major groups, let's say, so frequency control and network control. We're talking about on the frequency control, the balancing of the system. And of course here, renewable generation has a big issue because the forecast of the renewables, especially the wind, has for now, yet it has improved, is a fact, but it still has important error on the forecast. So if we look to that curve over there, it's an example of one day, we see a high decreasing ramp on the wind generation, but if that ramp is 1 hour previous or 1 hour after, the impact on ancillary surface in the grid will be very high. And if we put this on a bigger scale, we can see that there are thousands of megawatts that can be lacking into the system or entering not being expected. Solar will be much more easy to predict, but nevertheless, it is in fact important to have tools to balance the system and technologies like hydro, for instance, or other storage capacities to be perfectly balanced in real time. And going through the future, we're talking about different kinds of ancillary services, we have a lot of European projects going on, looking to the together management of different kind of assets, so talking about solar, wind, hydro, managed together as a whole. That cannot be possible nowadays in Portugal. our market rules are very strict about that. So we are eager to be able to change that and to manage, as it is in other markets right now within Europe. It can be, those technologies can be managed together. Sensible is also bringing storage and energy efficiency to the picture. Sector coupling, it was mentioned by Aurélie in the first panel. It's also very important because, as Antonio said in the beginning, the problem is not power, it's energy. And to have energy, we have to obviously have excess of power. And when that excess of power is being used, the other sectors have to be able to, being coupled to the energy sector, with hydrogen, with storage, with other kinds of management, to be able to put a 100% decarbonized system on the energy sector. Otherwise, that will not be possible. And also from the grids. We talked about a huge supergrid. Personally, I do not know if within 30 years that huge supergrid will be in fact needed. Because if we look to the smartness of the future system, microgrids management, smart grids managing the consumptions of small regional areas, maybe it's not needed to have a big facility that will cost a lot of money to transport energy from one part of Europe to the other. But that is something to discuss, and of course, different opinions are good for that because the discussion will be fruitful. So in summary, and I think I managed to keep up with my time, I think the future energy systems will be driven by much more smartness at the grid level. And this will add to the picture new ancillary services, new balancing services, and new opportunities for these kinds of technologies. The market has to be designed, definitely, because otherwise, with a 100% renewable system, the marginal cost will be zero. It was also mentioned in the morning. So the market will tend to pay zero to the generation. That is not possible, of course. The capex has to be paid. So new market designs have to be adapted. Otherwise, there will be no investments in renewable or traditional generation. Synthetic fuels, carbon capture, it was also mentioned in the morning. To have a 100% free carbon system, this has to be completely coupled because other technologies will be present. Transport systems have to be supplied, not only the electricity system. So coupling the sectors have to be a reality, and it will be with those policies and those technologies coming in together. And talking about policies, regulatory stability would be much important to comply with this. Not only the stability for an individual country, but also across Europe to allow that there is a level playing field for all the competitors within Europe. Otherwise, it will not be possible to accomplish the targets. Thank you.
Thank you, Bert. Concerning the regulatory stability we were talking about, it's a pity that the minister doesn't stay here because we had a couple of tough questions for him. But anyway, I'll ask him in private. Josh, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. I think the end of the last presentation is a good segue into into my presentation. My name is Josh Roberts, and I represent ResCoop EU. We are the European Federation for Renewable Energy Cooperatives, and our mission is to enable citizens to participate and benefit from the energy transition. So I think I will be responding to some of the things that were said earlier about how to maintain public support for the energy transition, not just for renewables, but for everything else that is required for that. So without further ado, just to give you a little bit of an idea about yourselves, because when we were presented at the EU level, or when we were discovered at the EU level, most people didn't understand who we were. They thought we were some interesting group who does microgrids or collective renewable energy sharing. But it is actually a lot more than that. And maybe just to step back, it's not so much that we involve ourselves in the energy sector. It's about how we involve ourselves in the energy sector. Ultimately, we represent a new way to do business. That is, we integrate a set of international cooperative principles about how we do business. Now, most of our members are small groups who invest in renewable energy generation in their local village or town, but it's a lot more than that. A lot of these groups are also investing in in energy efficiency. They're undertaking social issues that plague their community, like energy poverty. But they're also getting involved in a lot more interesting activities like electric vehicle sharing. They're getting into storage. Some of them supply themselves through a retail supplier they've set up with renewable energy. The list goes on and on. So that's kind of how I'd like to frame the rest of this presentation. These are the principles that I mentioned before. It's really, our members are not in it for a profit. It's about seeing renewables as a way, as a resource for doing other things in the community and benefiting, education and other socioeconomic needs. So what our association looks like right now, we have about 1,500 members. We represent around 1 million citizens across the EU, 12 member states. We have some national associations, but a lot of our associations are very small and only have a few members in each member state. And most of these members tend to be in Western and Northern Europe. So there is a lot of potential moving to the future here. What is that potential actually? So some of you might be asking yourselves, why does this matter? Why should we care? Well, by 2050, we had a study conducted by CE Delft that shows that by 2050, around 45% of renewable energy generation could be in the hands of citizens. That's a pretty staggering number. And when you break that down a bit, when you look at community projects, so a cooperative, our business model, around 37% of that 45% could come through an energy community. And when you extrapolate that beyond renewable energy, you find out that 83% of EU households will be participating in the energy sector by 2050 in some way or another. Some of us might see this as a challenge, but we certainly see this as an opportunity, particularly as we will require citizens to be more engaged about how, when they use their energy. So just a little bit about the benefits of renewable energy cooperatives. Like I said before, this is really about seeing renewables as a way to finance other initiatives. Like I said, I mean, it really depends on what you want. If you want to fund social housing, if you want to fund the renovation of your harbor, if you want to fund energy efficiency in local buildings, renovations is a big part of what we do. The list goes on, but there's also a more basic benefit that this type of activity can encourage collaboration between local citizens and their governments. The Commission actually has a study that shows that public acceptance can, public opposition can decrease from about 60% to about 10% if you actually give people the chance to involve themselves and invest in renewable energy projects. Kind of a more catchphrase, this is a gateway to the energy transition. Renewables is a great way to get people interested, and then they're engaging in flexibility and storage and all the things we need them to do. So a lot of this is happening despite many of the challenges that we face. Some of the more practical problems that energy communities face is that a lot of people are just getting into this. They're not energy experts, so they come at it with a very low level of knowledge compared to your average traditional market actor. And there's not a lot of information there for them to go off of. And the people who are in government or are in charge of giving licenses and this type of thing aren't necessarily interested in providing this information because it takes a lot of time. But by and large, the barriers are policy-based, and probably the most basic one is that there is just no real fundamental recognition or support for these types of actors. At EU level, I mean, before June, there was literally no mention of an active customer or an energy community in any legislation or policy in the energy sector. Now that is changing, and that's what I will get to, but there's a long list of challenges that sort of stem from that. The fact that the market is really geared towards larger players of the past this is all things that need to change. And one of the things that we've mentioned here also is about tenders. You know, we're moving from feed-in tariffs to a more market-based competitive scheme for offering support. Well, that's all fine and good, but you also need to think about the impacts that can have on your non-professional actors, your smaller actors, because this has certainly raised a bunch of challenges for them. So how are we addressing these challenges? Well, a lot of people, some of the speakers before me have mentioned the clean energy package. I will focus on the Renewables Directive for the next 5 minutes of my presentation. Basically, what the Commission is now acknowledging is that we need to bring citizens along in the energy transition, or this is just not going to be a success. It's just a fact. And more people are able to participate. But we need the right policies and regulations in place for them to be able to do that. And the Renewables Directive has provided a basis, essentially through 3 things. First, through the acknowledgement of energy communities and even individual households and small businesses as renewable energy self-consumers, they now have a definition. And this is important for creating policies and understanding the challenges that they face. But then they have also, they have a set of rights that ensure that they have a level playing field so that they can participate in the energy sector, but also an enabling framework. And I'll get to some of these in a second. So this fancy graph that I have is really sort of the different components of what an energy community is. We were very much involved in part of this process to ensure that this is about local communities taking ownership and control of their assets and their infrastructure, and to make sure that this isn't about profit making for larger energy companies. It's really about providing that small space for these types of actors to get involved so that they can benefit from the energy transition. It's not non-profit oriented, but it's largely based on using the revenues to pursue community and local needs instead of profits for shareholders, for instance. And then just sort of a basic set of rights, basic as being able to participate in an energy community without burdens, to be able to access different markets, to be able to be sure that when governments are designing their support schemes, that energy communities are not excluded simply because we decide we want to move from an auction or a tender. There are a lot of ways you can go about that, but we now have the space to put proposals forward. And some more interesting things on the local level, such as the right to engage in energy sharing, and this should unlock a lot of things that people are testing now, like peer-to-peer energy sharing, blockchain, on the local and the regional level. So these are things to look out for. This is probably what's more interesting. This wasn't part of the Commission's proposal originally, but we have put this forward, and that is sort of an enabling framework. And basically, what is that? Well, member states will be required to go and assess what is the actual potential for energy communities in our country. And then they will need to look at how to address the barriers that they identify for that. In Portugal, for instance, I think we have a member, Copernico. They will probably be very influential in being able to provide information on some of these barriers and opportunities here. But that's just an example. But there's a lot more basic things like providing municipalities with support so that they can collaborate with energy communities to invest in renewables locally, so that people who are facing vulnerability or an energy poor situation won't be excluded from being able to participate in these types of communities simply because of their situation. They should have some help so that they are brought along. This is a very important component of fairness and public support in the long term that we cannot overlook. And a lot of this also has to do with what communities are paying for the system costs. A lot of people in the industry will say that energy communities and prosumers in general are just adding cost to the system. Well, if you want to design your market that way, okay, maybe that is the case, but just like everything else, there's a way to design the market so that the value of these actors in the energy system is actually reflected. And a lot more of the basic information, procedures, streamlining, and this type of thing. These are all mechanisms and measures that governments can take to ensure that energy communities have a level playing field. So for the last minute, these are the tools that are being put in place at EU level. Now they will have to trickle down to the national level. But the story is not over. The market design at EU level is still being negotiated, and there are still some open questions. The biggest one is whether we can maintain coherency between the market design and what was agreed in the Renewables Directive. One could argue that the Renewables Directive is a lot more ambitious on this issue than the market design. And so we will have to reconcile these two potentially differing opinions. A lot of this will have to do with priority dispatch. Okay, maybe we want to get rid of this, maybe we want everybody to have balancing responsibilities. But again, you have to think about who you are putting these responsibilities on and whether they actually have the capacity to undertake them. For your traditional market actors who are day traders, they live their lives getting paid to do this stuff. This is not necessarily the case for your smaller community actors. So you need to make sure that as you are trying to integrate renewables into the market, that you are not by de facto excluding all of these people who you need to bring along. And even a more basic issue that we've talked about a little bit about engaging citizens in decision making. A lot of this has been on infrastructure, but the member states will have to come up with national plans for how they're going to undertake their energy efficiency and renewable energy targets. But a component of that is about citizen engagement. And now it's not just about citizens as the general public, it's about citizens as actual business stakeholders in the energy sector and how they're going to be a part of this. So those are all just food for thought. Thanks a lot. And
Thank you. Javier Revuelta, Principal Management Consulting.
Hello. So I will speak about the work we do in POERI. For those of you who don't know POERI, we are a consulting firm mostly known for our projections on what can happen, will happen under certain assumptions in the future of the electricity power sector and commodities, because they are very interlinked. The electricity sector depends a lot on what will happen to gas and coal and oil, so we have an integrated approach of projecting all of those, including regulatory developments. Our typical clients are mostly funds, banks, sometimes governments. So I can't really speak on behalf of the investors community, but we do very closely with them. So I'll bring a lot of the concerns that the investors community have through our advice or through our modeling of the future. And I think this is very relevant, because I think we all agree that capital, even though we all like green energy and we do want to reduce CO2 emissions, capital doesn't like green energy. Capital likes capital, meaning that capital will only go into renewable energies if the future they see provides a return according to the risks they perceive. So I'm going to speak about those risks that the financial community and banks see through our analysis. So we've spoken, I think, about this concept. This illustrates the simple concept that, so this is the price duration curve of, let's say, 2020 or 2025 in the Iberian market. And most of the time, the blue line is the price set by CCGTs, which burn gas. So this price is typically set by gas and CO2. At today's levels, we are around 60 to 70 euros. Other years, 2016 and 17, with cheaper gas, we were closer to the mid-40s. And what I'm illustrating here is the concept of apparent grid parity, and I will comment on the apparent part, which I think is very relevant. So we are in a situation since 2018 or 19 in which the LCOE of wind and solar projects, which is the average return that every megawatt hour produced should be remunerated at in order for the investment to go forward, to be for the investor to see a return in line with their expectations. These levels, these LCOEs, are already below the market prices. So we can, rough number, we can talk 40 to 50 euros for wind, depending on the wind resource. We're definitely around or below 40 for solar. Now, does this mean that infinite wind and solar can come into the system? And does this even mean that because there is currently, at today's prices, the revenues that an investor could get today, does this mean they will make the investment? Not necessarily, and I will walk you through the reasons for that. So this illustrates what Berto has shown, how in certain hours in the system there is more renewable energy than the Iberian system can cope with. Sometimes there is more energy than can be consumed or stored or exported. Nothing can be done with it. Part of this energy has to be curtailed. And what matters to prices is that in these situations, the market prices collapse down to close to zero. Let's say zero for simplicity. It's actually 2 or 3 euros is the variable bids of wind generally in the Iberian Peninsula. Now, this is not a problem per se, but what matters is the impact that these situations have on what we call the capture prices of wind or solar technologies. Obviously, the more frequently this happens, the worse for merchant revenues. So this already happens, it has happened in the past. As I said, it's not a problem per se. What matters is really what will happen in the future as we put numbers to the energy, renewable energy objectives that we have for 2030 and beyond. Just illustrating here that the price of electricity, which is in the lines, depends mostly on gas and the frequency of curtailments. So very humid years or very windy years, we can have up to, in the past we've had up to 7-8% of hours with curtailments. In very dry years, when there is very little run-of-river hydro, it can go as low as 1 or 2%. Now, in this slide I show that the fact that the high-level options that governments have in the next decade. And to have a view on what the outlook for renewables is, we should actually know whether governments will go for what we call here approach 1 or approach 2. Approach 1 is an approach where governments basically don't intervene because there is grid parity, and it seems that wind and solar projects are being developed in Iberia. Let's do nothing. That way we cannot get it wrong because we're not doing anything. And renewables are still being developed. So this is a possibility. It's actually the view we had, and we still have for both countries, Spain and Portugal. Although this has to be decided in the next few months. The problem with approach 1 is that the market will decide how many renewables are developed, and we may reach a target or we may not. Another problem is hurdle rates and costs to develop renewables is a lot more expensive in approach 1. So the fact that we have today maybe 50 or 60 euros revenues, but with huge risk of prices collapsing, implies that investors will only invest if the returns they expect through our modeling or somebody's modeling on the future looks interesting. And they need to expect much higher prices, which means that a lot fewer renewables are definitely developed under approach 1 than under approach 2. In approach 2, the government would not only state they want to reach an objective. It's very nice to say we want to reach 32 or 35%. What matters is really what do they do about it? I mean, do they put in place auctions which guarantee such investments to go forward? And the problem which has been discussed this morning by Christopher of having a European target but not a national one is that if we don't have a national target in Spain or Portugal, and there's no penalty associated to not achieving a goal, the wish, I would say, is useless. So what matters is, I would only talk about approach 2 if governments not only wish a target, but they actually implement a calendar of auctions or whatever mechanism. There are many options, regulatory options, but there has to be one that actually states this many megawatts will be auctioned. That's approach 2. Just a wish, but with no specific support is still approach 1, and this is still our current view of how the future will shape. Now, this is just illustrating how we model the future. I will just mention that We model the whole European power system until 2040. We're starting to work until 2050 with hourly resolution to really make detailed numbers on whether investments seem profitable or not for investors and for banks. There are many futures that we can model. And we typically every 3 months we plan for 3, central, high, low. Central, I would say, is our best view, and therefore I think that the best view of many investors that trust us in our view of the future. And we plan for, or we model systems where we take our best view on regulatory decisions, how many electric vehicles will come in the system, and how many interconnections, and how many storage plants will come in the system. And so we have done numbers of the many potential futures. I'm going to show a few numbers on our best view under approach 1, which, as I said, is still our view of how the renewable sector will develop in the next decade. But this remains to be seen because actually the Spanish government has stated the opposite. We'll see whether they implement really what they have said they will implement. And what we show here is that based on our projections of commodities, we see a lot of mostly solar being developed. So a lot of solar, around 20 gigawatts, a bit more in Spain, around up to 3 gigawatts in Portugal. And then a lot more, almost double those figures for 2040. And this is what is profitable under what we think are reasonable returns for investors under our views that we actually also model on commodities. Just take the order of magnitude because the exact numbers depend a lot on the exact cost of fuel, the exact hurdle rates, which in turn depend on the PPA markets, whether banks will take some merchant risk or not. But this is currently what we would expect in POIRI's central view with no specific government support. So we'll reach those figures, 60% in Spain, 75% in Portugal, roughly. Now, it is possible to go beyond that, but it is only possible because this magnitude is what sets the threshold capture prices or threshold returns on the investments that don't need subsidies. Going beyond this is only possible with subsidies, which means that if governments want to go above this level, you better start assuming that some money and some calendar of auctions will be needed. This is just to illustrate how we go to a very volatile market. I illustrate here how we expect, with so much PV capacity coming online, we expect power prices to be the lowest around the middle of next decade, around noon, instead of at night. I illustrate here what Chris also discussed this morning, how the targets are on the black total energy production. And now most of the responsibility or most of the weight of the development of renewables will go on electricity. There's actually a big impact on what can be done on the heating and cooling sector with very ambitious European targets, which personally I would say are extremely hard to achieve, which means that if we commit to 35% in Spain, as the minister said, or 40, apparently up to 50% is on the table for Portugal, although this is really uncertain to us. We should have some visibility in the next few weeks or months. If we commit to such high penetrations and heating and cooling cannot do a lot more than the current levels, around 30 in Portugal, around below 20% in Spain, means that a lot of the weight will go on electricity. Now, how does this translate into megawatts and into power prices? So the higher the target, and this you see here on the left, you see the hourly demand in January, the hourly demand in June, in summer, in 2030, and reaching these very high penetrations of up to 35%, what you see here is that in this extreme, so what you see here is an assumption where heating and cooling would not contribute as much as the European Union said, or wishes. And we need a system in which you see that every single day we would have surpluses of above 20 gigawatts of wind or solar. Every single day. I think it should be intuitive that a system with over an Iberian system with over 100 gigawatts, which would be needed, with demands which will fluctuate between 40, let's say 40, 60 gigawatts, it should be intuitive that almost half the time there is a surplus. And the impact on capture prices, well, these are the numbers for specifically for Portugal. If we want to go towards a 40% renewable energy in Portugal, deducting the contributions of heating and cooling and transport, we get roughly to this level of 82% electricity. And now, this will be a bit scary. Now, when we put those numbers on a market model and check what the baseload prices and the capture prices of wind and solar are, with this almost 40% of the time having curtailments, means the baseload prices, so the arithmetic mean of power prices goes way below the current levels. Let's say half the time at 50 to 60 euros, half the time at 0. That's how you get 30 on average, or even below. For wind and solar, you get even below those levels. You get numbers in the 10s or in the 20s. This means that today's investments are absolutely a no-go. So it doesn't take, investors will not wait until 2030 for this to happen. It just takes for them to know today that by 2030, this is what the power system looks like, because the governments have said they want this power system by 2030. Today's decision is because they need 40 on average. If you draw a flat line, let's say 35 to 40 euros, a flat line, the NPV of these figures is less than 40 on average. So you start with 50, but you end with 25. That doesn't work. And this is just to say that governments, the simple statement that they will go to a very renewable energy policy without auctions in place will, or has the potential to completely stop merchant development today, even if the numbers look great for today.
Time up, Javier.
Sorry?
Time up. So,
yeah, so, and I call this potential death death by renewables to merchant investment. This is just something that should be monitored, because unless governments put in place auctions, merchant developments will, or most of the investments trusting that this can happen, will not go forward. So some takeaways. Parent grid parity for wind and solar does set the scene for apparently lots of renewables coming in the system without governments doing anything. Well, that's actually wrong. I mean, that's, as I said, just governments not putting in place mechanisms to make it happen, or to give confidence to a floor or feed-in tariff, somehow to give some views to investors that their 25-year investments will reach their hurdle rates. They will not happen. Now, these must be coordinated. The energy policy must be coordinated between Iberia and Portugal, because if Spain alone goes for a very ambitious target and Portugal doesn't, the Iberian system, the Iberian prices will be the same for both. So Portugal not setting auctions, you can be in a situation where all the solar and wind is developed in Spain and not in Portugal, because money doesn't care. It will go wherever the landscape looks better and returns look better. So there has to be a coordination between Spain and Portugal, and if one goes for a very renewable system, the other would better do the same, or nothing will be developed in their system.
To sum up, please.
Just to comment on the fact that our view is that governments should look at the total system cost and not just the subsidies, because I know that in Portugal and also in Spain it's very critical to talk about subsidies. It's public money. Well, actually, customers prefer to pay subsidies, 10, 20 euros, if the total energy bill is lower. So if you go to the extreme of a system 100% renewables, customers would be very happy to pay 40 euros subsidy and 0 to the pool price, because the addition 0 plus 40 is 40. The addition of no subsidy, but with a pool that stays at 50, 50 is more than 40. Customers prefer subsidies as long as the total energy bill is lower. So, and this is what we think governments should care about. So don't be scared by the word subsidies. Plus also keep in mind that the new subsidies, even in these scary scenarios of the pool of capture prices being in the 10s or 20 euros, means the system needs to top up from, let's say, 20 to 35, which is a small amount of money as compared to the old days of subsidies at 300 or 400 euros we had for PV, or in the 70s or 80s that we had for wind.
You're way beyond time, Javier.
Okay.
Sum up.
So outlook is positive, but we need views on the 2030 targets. we need to know, or investors to actually go ahead with their investment, they need to know whether there will be support schemes, yes or no. I didn't mention the grids, but huge potential bottleneck is the grids. It would be a shame that grids prevent or slow down the development of renewables. A big effort needs to be done in both countries, especially in Portugal, where we know of huge bottlenecks. So secure, affordable and sustainable energy policy is possible, but it will not happen alone. It will not happen without government statements and actions, starting not in 2025, but in 2018 or 19, where those investments are being made.
Thank you. Okay, before we hand out the word to the public, we've been talking about storage here as one of the solutions to create a stable flow of energy. What's your take on that? What does capital think about it?
So do the
it's on.
Yeah, okay. So what do numbers look like for storage? They merchant investments in storage, in our numbers in the Iberian Peninsula, they do not add up, even assuming high reductions in the capex. So we don't see them happening just based on arbitrage opportunities, peak of peak. Despite, I know the intuition is, well, if you get frequently zero and then spikes at 180, intuition says, aren't batteries profitable? Well, we've actually looked with lots of detail at the economics of batteries, and they don't add up until they are, their market revenues would be complemented by capacity payments or some form of additional payments to the market, which we think will only happen when the TSOs say that there is a security of supply issue, and they would create some sort of capacity mechanism to be designed. When this happens, that's when the missing money that we see for batteries is lower than CCGTs. But basically, the whole next decade, numbers do not add up. I know it's counterintuitive. In our numbers, they don't. Keep in mind that our modeling already considers quite a lot of storage and flexible demand. We are considering the current pumped hydro storage. We have quite a bit in the Iberian Peninsula. We expect another gigawatt, more than a gigawatt coming online in Portugal, the Tâmega project. We expect another project in Spain, another gigawatt of pumped hydro storage. The interconnections with France are sort of a storage. So whenever prices collapse, we would be exporting sort of in the same way as a battery, which would be charging. Okay. And then there's a huge impact of electric vehicles. Since we do expect that a large share of the electric vehicles will charge in these moments of very low prices. So the system already, the Iberian system has quite some flexibility, and additional batteries, given their capex, for now we don't see them happening.
Josh, you mentioned that people can produce up to 45% of EU's electricity. Is it safe to leave this in the hands of people? Suppose there's a blackout, there's a problem. It's a security problem.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's where the next step comes in. This isn't just about renewables. This is a lot of our members are currently involved in a lot of innovation projects where they're setting up microgrids, they're testing out virtual power plants. Mm-hmm. So they are using storage, they're using heat pumps, they're using electric vehicles to provide flexibility services, ancillary services to ensure stability at the local level with a higher penetration of renewables at the same time.
How far are we from that?
How far are we away from that? Oh, I mean, that's a good question. I think I think the technology is getting there, and right now we are just trying to get the steps in place for the regulation to follow. I mean, you see the costs of storage going down. I mean, your prognostication is what it is, but I think a lot of people are still going to be uptaking these types of technologies, and I think with electric vehicles storage, you will see this area grow quite rapidly. I mean, and for instance, I was just looking up a figure while the presentation was finishing. In California, everybody's worried about all of the penetration. And California, it's not a very dissimilar electricity system to what you have here in Portugal. Yeah. You have mountains, you have wind, you have lots of sun. They've saved $2.6 billion in transmission upgrades because of distributed technologies like distributed solar demand response. this is exactly what we are looking for citizens and SMEs to participate in ensuring that we can do this safely and cost efficiently.
Bert, is this possible?
Yeah, I strongly confess that I see that future. And the costs things is obviously a big issue. But in the future, if it's possible to share those costs with the different beneficiaries of the infrastructures, let's say, for instance, the hydrogen, we're talking about storage. Yeah. If you have an excess of renewable generation, which is not possible to put in place, to use, yeah, then you can produce hydrogen for free. And if you use that hydrogen for other sectors, they will benefit for lower costs of generation of the hydrogen. It can be transports, it can be agriculture, it can be e-cars with fuel cells. So it is huge possibilities, and it's not necessary to be paid by only one of the beneficiaries. That's one of the main problems of the technologies, is that right now when we put the numbers on, they don't go out because you are investing in paying everything, and you only get a part of the benefits.
Yeah. Okay. Evan? Yeah, sure.
Just a small comment on batteries, because I said numbers don't add up. There are two types of investment. One is in utility scale batteries, and the economics for domestic are slightly different. Not only that,
companies also.
Or companies, yes. The economics are different because the grid charges are involved.
Yeah.
So you incur a bit more capex, but you also save a bit more because you save part of the grid charges. So the economics are slightly different, and actually they do look, because of the high grid charges we have in Iberia, more in Spain than in Portugal, the numbers actually look slightly positive, which means that there is some money to be saved with distributed generation, not much, but there is a bit. And anyway, for domestic and companies, something which is very relevant is the fact that not only economics play a role. Sometimes people just want to be green, and there's definitely some companies that are willing to pay a bit more for being 100% green, and some people will put a rooftop, the Tesla or whatever, rooftop with tiles, which are possibly more expensive, but it's just fancy and it's nice to have to self-produce. So the economics for residential are different, and there will definitely be some.
Okay, Bert, I have another question for you. You mentioned stability and predictability. Do you think, how does ADP cope with this changing energetic behavior of the not only governments but also regulators in Portugal?
That's a huge problem, of course.
You don't need to blush. Okay?
No, of course. No, the thing is that, well, I said it is on the video. We, as EDP, decided to invest a lot in the last couple of years in generation in Portugal, based in a lot of assumptions and what we knew at the time. Yeah. So we were expecting capacity payments for almost all the new technologies and all the new developments. We were expecting incomes on ancillary services that after a couple of years they were cut by a decree because we were compared with the prices in Spain. As I said also, the regulatory framework is not the same in Portugal and in Spain, so it is important to compare what is comparable, because our colleagues in Spain have a lot more markets and incomes that at the end of the day the generators can have to sum up to the final generation income compared with us. So, but nevertheless, we invested. We do agree that the greener future is important. We also go through renewable energy as a goal for the company. Sustainability is one of our mission, of course, one of our mission tops. But costs are nowadays a huge problem. And if you look to our results, most of the new developments that we have, negative EBITDAs. So that's a problem for the stability.
Thank you. Bom, é a altura de perguntar às pessoas aqui na audiência se alguém tem questões para colocar ou se tem statements para fazer em relação àquilo que foi dito pelos três intervenientes aqui. Temos alguns minutos guardados para isso. Quem é que quer ser o primeiro? Quem é que quer ser o segundo? E quem é que quer ser o terceiro?
Is it turn on? Hello?
Onde é que está?
Hello?
Diga-me só qual é a geografia, só favor. Ali. Okay.
Oh, okay, I will stand up. Hello?
Espera aí, deixe-me só. Parece que aqui deste lado direito foi o primeiro. Aguenta aí só um bocadinho, força.
Well, my name is Nebesha Bogdanovic, EKZ Switzerland, and I have a question from gentleman from Poeri. You show a graph which looks very scary for our potential investors, which is, let's say, your expectation that base load price is going down from the range from 20 to 30 euro per megawatt hour for all new, let's say, assets which will come, I don't know, next 10 to 15 years. However, I would like to understand it a little bit better, because you mentioned that, as we all know, that all those prices are in high correlation with the development in the commodity markets. Does it mean that we should expect decoupling of the price development of the electricity sector with the development in commodity markets? It's the first question. And how did you actually evaluate this, or how did you calculate those prices? Did you take Iberian Peninsula as a separate, as an island, or you took also into correlation the influence of German, France, Central European countries in your model? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Javier?
First of all, let me remind that this scary scenario is not our central view. It's a scenario where over 8 gigawatts per year for 10 years in a row are developed in Iberia, in Spain and Portugal. So this is not our central view. It's just a what-if analysis. You know, what if we put as many renewables as the Iberian system would need to comply with very ambitious targets of 35% in Spain, 40% in Portugal, and also the heating and cooling sector doesn't contribute as much as the European Union target suggests, but more in line with our independent view of what will really happen, which is slightly lower. So it's a what-if, not our central view. Second, both in this scary, let's say, political scenario and in our central view where a lot less renewables are developed, so by 2030 our central view is roughly a bit more than 20 gigawatts, 25 gigawatts in Spain and Portugal combined. In both, yes, answer to your question, decoupling between baseload prices and solar capture prices, we definitely think they will happen. How much, whether the capture rates go down to 0.9, 0.8, how much will depend on how much solar is really installed, and it will also depend on some uncertain elements such as how many electric vehicles will come in the system, will the Spain-France interconnections be built, will the Portugal-Morocco interconnection be built. So we have our best view on all of those, but we could get it wrong in many of those aspects. So yes, there will be a decoupling. How much, what the exact decoupling will be will depend on commodities and on the solar capacity to be installed, but also on system elements which can mitigate this reduction. So we have our central view, but electric vehicles, honestly, we could get it wrong by 100%. You know, it could be double or half. Interconnections, we could get it wrong. We think the Spain-France will be developed. It might not go forward. So,
okay, the kill-up.
João de Melo, sou professor de Engenharia do Ambiente na Universidade Nova de Lisboa. I'd like to make a statement and ask a question. The statement is that there was in several of the interventions the misconception that hydropower is green energy. It could be green energy only if you are looking at eutrophication in the large reservoirs. The last large dams built in Portugal are actually had a huge impact, negative impact, particularly two that were built by EDP, Baixo Sabor and Forstua. And they were built under the assumption that we as consumers or taxpayers would pay for it. So there would be a capacity payment, which in fact is not necessary because these dams are going to produce very little energy at a very high price, as Mr. Bert Martins has recognized. My question is, if decentralized storage will in fact become cheaper, what would be the foreseeable effect on the workings of the grid, and whether investments or incentives for decentralized power production could actually have the effect of creating a more balanced and actually more stable system.
Obrigado. Berto.
Okay, so first of all, the first part of your statement, obviously we have a different opinion on you, but that's normal. The point is the capacity payments, as I mentioned, are not the way to pay for the investment, are a way to support a part of the investment. Don't forget that a hydro scheme such as Baixo Sabor or Forstua are paid around about 50 to 60 years, and the costs aren't even close to be comparable with the capex that were invested under those reservoirs. Also, the thing about the little energy, so they are both equipped with the pump storage capacity, so they are also able to participate on balancing the system whenever it's needed. Besides the profiting, nowadays non-existing differences between peak and off-peak hours that will be obviously influenced by the excess of renewable energy when there exists. Going through the second part, yes, I think storage will play an important role, but don't forget to have storage, you have to have excess of energy. So if you don't have excess of renewable energy, storage will don't do nothing. So as Javier was saying, the numbers of putting a battery only playing with peak and off-peak prices don't go. It's not possible to remunerate an investment like that. So you have to get differences, huge differences on prices between peak and off-peak to put a battery become a reasonable investment for the future. Profitable investment. Yeah. They will go, in fact, on the microgrids, on the domestic usage, because those values are completely different compared with the wholesale markets. And for that, I think it will be important to manage the concept of the communities, the concept of domestic usage, and the smartness, together with the smartness of the system. So it should be interesting with that point of view.
Okay. Senor, Josh.
I just wanted to, maybe just comment on this, coming from the distributed side of the equation. I mean, and coming from California, where hydro storage is also a big issue. Our issue there, we have lots of water issues, and climate change and reduced rainfall and snowpack is actually going to be a large impact in the long term about the role that hydro actually plays as an energy resource. So I don't know what the situation here is in Portugal, but I imagine people here will need to ask themselves those sort of questions: is what role is hydro going to be able to play in the future because of climate change?
Portugal and Spain.
And how do we adapt the electricity system to keep up with that?
Senhora.
Bom dia a todos. Ana Rita Antunes da Copernic. Oh, sorry, in English now. Ana Rita Antunes from Copernic, the first renewable Portuguese cooperative. I have a question for Mr. Berto Martins. Since he's the only working in Portugal, I would like to know your opinion about what we need in Portugal to change in our legal framework to be able to build the first energy community in Portugal. Thank you.
Very good question.
We should have kept the minister here.
Yeah. But also someone from the regulator can help, besides the minister.
Yes.
Because the thing is, the concepts exist, but in fact it's very difficult to implement it in Portugal due to our market rules. It is necessary to change a lot in the legislation to allow that reality of the community to be established under our territory. I'll give you a small example. We have generation in Alentejo, Alqueva power plant. We have generation in the center of the country, Tejo and Mondego, and in the north. Our legislation does not allow us to shift megawatts from one region to the other region without paying penalties. Okay? So we are forced under our legislation to stick within a geographic area for our conventional generation. And talking about conventional generation, we are talking about plants of 10 megawatts until the 300 and something megawatts that most of our new units can do. So this does not occur exactly like this under almost all European markets. So we have to work a lot under legislation. We have to try to convince the TSOs, the legislators, that we are not the bad guys in the picture. It is possible within the specific ranges and not causing restrictions to the system, because we know that in fact sometimes, or some small set of hours, that could be some kind of problems with the grid that does not allow to do those shifting, but most of the time that is perfectly possible. But under the laws that we have to face until now, that is not possible. So answering directly to your question, we have to pressure the legislation to do so.
António.
Okay, this is more not it's a comment, not a question to our speakers, and probably I will have to do it in Portuguese because it's for the audience, for the Portuguese audience, but I will do it in English so our guests can understand. We at APREN, people look at us very often saying that we are a lobby association. Of course we do lobby. But of course, before being president of APREN, me and my colleagues from the board, we are Portuguese. Actually, we have one French, but and one half Spanish, it's me. But we are, first of all, we are Portuguese. And we try to look what will be the future for Portugal on these aspects. And we try to do studies, and not going only in inconsequent speeches from some politicians that say we are going to do this, that, and that. We try to see how to achieve, how we do it. Last year, we present in our conference the study done by the group of Professor Julia Seixas, that we show the advantage of being having more renewables. And we found 3 scenarios. One, business as usual, that in the electric sector will means that we reach the 2020 target of 60% renewables in electricity, and we maintain up to 2050. The other scenario is a scenario concerning having 60% of mitigation of CO2 emissions. And this was achieved with a share of close to 95% in the electricity. And the third scenario, that the mitigation was 75%. And doing 75%, we have to go to the other sectors, that was said in the first panel of the morning. We have to go to the other sectors and electrify them, because electrifying the uses is energy efficiency. João, electrifying uses is energy efficiency. And this is contained in the numbers of the projections we have. And we could see that this was interesting compared with the business as usual scenario. But our Prime Minister says that we need to be carbon neutral by 2050. And I remember our scenario we studied is 75% mitigation. Renewable carbon neutral in 2050 means renewable carbon mitigation of 86%. 86%. So it's a more ambitious scenario. So we have to think what we are doing. And after that, we hired Poiri. Javier Volta was the head of the project to see not only the question of the emissions that was already done, but how the markets react, how the integration of the Portuguese market, what impact will have in the tariffs, how we'll do it. And he presents us what is going to do. It's possible, it's achievable. But there's one thing very important. In order to achieve that, we have to completely change the way the electricity is paid for. So it's not marginal market. Because when will be 100% renewables, the 8,760 hours of the year, the marginal cost will be 0. No one is going to invest to receive 0 for the product they produce. So we have to review that. this way, everybody in this morning, the first panel, in this panel, you see, it's possible to achieve, but we have to change our mindset and have the change of mindset of our politicians, of our regulators. And one thing very, very important is that in order to achieve, in order to have such a quantity of power installed, we need planning. We need planning for the grid, both the transport grid and the distribution grid. We need to see the impact. We have to do studies. And this planning cannot be done in the back of an envelope or in the knees, sitting here in a conference room. No, it takes years, studies, analysis. And for that, we need a clear vision from what we want. And this is not compatible with changing politicians every 4 years. The sector, we should be deciding now what we have to do after 2030, not after 2020. 2020 for planning is already passed. And this is something that is very hard, first, for the politician to understand. Second, to the population to accept it. And that's why we have to change. And we have to change a lot. And I'm here, APREN is here, to help this change. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Antonio. I was afraid I would have to say those things, so Antonio just spared me the sermon. So you're all invited to go for lunch, and we'll be back here at 2:30 p.m. Thank you very much, and thank you, people from the panel.